Hey guys, welcome back. BDCKR here. We're back with Season 9, Episode 31 of our weekly Q&A videos, sort of still in the eye of the storm in terms of weird scheduling stuff. So this is our effort to sort of make as much normalcy as possible, and hopefully the feed won't be too disrupted with this, but you're going to be seeing some weird scheduling in the coming weeks.
Yeah.
So we appreciate everyone for bearing with us.
There's going to be a gap where neither of us is in our air quote studio, quote unquote studio.
Yeah.
And we're going to see if we can make something happen, but it's going to be tough.
It seems not super likely. We'll figure it out.
Right.
Anyways, so we wanted to talk a little bit about the team before we got into just sort of...
Right. So we've gotten a bit away from this mainly because our Q&A schedule's been so disrupted, but I want to talk about the team because so one of the things that people always ask about is, well, don't you get bored of playing it? Don't you? And I feel like it's, when I talk to I don't drink at all, but when I talk to somebody who drinks and they appreciate whiskey, you know, when they get like really into the flavors and the stuff that I can't taste at all, or wines, where they say, oh, it's got this floral note, or it has a hint of, even though it's got none of whatever those things are in it. Right. Yeah.
So you know what's interesting? Yeah. I've kind of been a little bit like that about coffee on this trip. I was not a fan of coffee before, but I have learned to. I'm still not necessarily like the biggest fan,
right?
But I find it really interesting, and I could be a bit of a coffee snob. Maybe for next episode a little bit we can talk a little bit about what I've learned about coffee.
Okay.
And I'm sure I'll sound way too confident for the amount I know, which is barely anything.
Oh, that's kind of cool. So there's the parallel there, right? That the more I play Injustice, the more I appreciate some of the subtleties, and it goes into this team a little bit. That I think we've played variations of this before, but some of the things are not so obvious until you play them. So let me talk about this, because this week the challenge is Arkham Knight, whose name I love, right? Green Arrow, Arrow, Green Arrow.
Those are always very funny, where they sort of, you see the strain between the name of the universe that they're from and then the naming scheme that the game has picked, and they've sort of backed themselves into a corner where there's not really anything they can do that doesn't sound incredibly goofy.
Batman Ninja Batman. Arkham Knight,
absolutely.
The Arkham Knight. The fact that there's a "the" in the middle of it makes it even better.
Oh, what's the metal Joker character and Batman? It's
the Merciless?
Batman Ninja Batman.
Yeah.
And then Batman Ninja Lord Joker.
Right.
Like
he's Batman and Joker.
Yeah. Some of it gets really in the weeds. And then also, like learning which 10% cards apply to who, and then being like, that is not who that character is, or
Right. No, so the reason why this is interesting is there's some things that aren't really obvious. I want to point it out to the people who are watching the gameplay. So Arkham Knight is the basic damage dealer. And I talked about it in last week's update, where he hits, because he has so many extra hits on both his tap combo and his swipe combo, that the tap combo is, if you complete a tap combo, the amount of basic damage he does is it's boosted about 60% higher than it would be for somebody with a similar attack stat. But if you complete a swipe combo, it's about 80-something% boosted over the same a character with the same attack stat. So I've gotten away from trying to get the combo ender, because the basic swipe combo just does more damage, even if you can't get the combo ender effects with the gears.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. That is a very subtle nuance.
Right. So you could try to get the combo enders, and you still get less of a boost in damage than you would with the swipe combo. And the problem is you don't get the combo enders that often. So originally this team, when I was playing around with this most recently, I wanted it to have gauntlets, so that he could there'd be a little bit of, the recuperative benefit, right? Where you could heal himself and the team and do it in a big way, because he's got so many combo ender hits. But because it doesn't trigger so often, I found it's actually better to have Astral Harness to make him a little harder. So he doesn't heal, but he's got so much more flexibility. He can do so much more and be more useful, because as soon as he tags in, you don't have to worry about him getting hit by a special. You don't have to worry about the other player doing more. And what you've done is you've made him even more of a meat shield than he would normally be on an Arkham team. And so the other part is he doesn't have overpowered super, and that would have been an easy way to get him to 100% crit chance on his basics. But the starting point is a basic damage gear that has basic crit chance booster, which is I think there's 3 or 4 of them maybe that have all the same properties with boosting basic damage by 70%, crit chance by 40% only instead of 50. So you still only get 90%, but to me it's enough because it's the combination. Even overpowered super only gives you a 50% basic damage boost, and it's sort of like a safety net against a little tiny safety net against a non-crit team like Red Sun Green Lantern. And then the last gear, so instead of giving overpowered super, it's custom rifle. So there's a 70% basic damage boost, which you would get with almost any other gear, but a tiny 11% unblockable and a 55% more damage on crit attacks. And so I feel like this balances out because really, if we're going to be leaning into his basic attack, even that 11% unblockable means something, right? So there's a 1 in 10 chance that you're going to just lay a bomb on them.
That does make sense. Yeah, it's less about getting those sort of tiny little percentages up and more about those sort of differences that are really felt when they happen.
Right.
And genuinely make sort of like a difference in how fast the fight completes.
Right. And I guess,
as opposed to just sort of making like the numbers the biggest or like the percents like as close to like 100 as possible in all cases.
Right. And it works in sync with the Astro Harness because one thing that the Astro Harness doesn't tell you it doesn't tell you get unblocked hits, but that's what you do because when you're invulnerable, you don't have to block when they're attacking you. And so you can interrupt their combo any point in it. It takes no skill at all as long as the invulnerability is up. And on top of that, you've got the unblockable chance. So it's actually really synergistic, and it makes him that much more powerful.
Okay, that is a very sort of fine difference look. And so next week or whenever the next Q&A drops, you can look forward to my version of this, but on a topic that nobody cares about. And also, I'm nowhere near as much of an expert. I have I would say more coffee knowledge than somebody who just orders coffee and drinks it. And less knowledge than anybody who's cared about it and been on that train for longer than I am.
Our neighbor is a huge coffee aficionado. You need to have a conversation with him when you get back.
Now we might need to compare notes, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the rest of the team, Arkham Knight Batgirl is really simple, but again, another variation. So Arkham Knight Batgirl, if you don't screw it up and have her get knocked out too early, basically allows for 2 big bombs each time her teammate's about to be knocked out, for her to drop in, do a huge amount of damage, or look at it another way. You can look at it as being able to eat 2 supers from her teammates. So
that's solid,
right? Yeah, I mean, hugely powerful. She is irreplaceable. That's one of the common questions we get, right? So, well, if I don't have this guy, can I use this person instead? And on an Arkham Knight team, there is nobody who comes even close to replacing Arkham Knight Batgirl for just how important she is for the team.
Yeah, because technically the answer is always yes. You can always just put somebody else on the team instead, and play with that team, and the game's not going to stop you.
Right.
There was I really liked there's this podcast that I have talked about a million times, my brother and me, and they did an ad for Squarespace, and the twist they put on it, and I just listened to this recently, so it stuck in my head, is they were like, oh, you can make a bad one if you want. Nobody tells you, but you can actually make a bad website, and they can't stop you. They're like, they'll make it hard. They've got really good tools for you, but if you want to make a terrible website, it's fine. You're allowed. And so, when we give our advice, it's that, right? Where we say, who can you replace this with? And we go, anyone. You can put any character on it. You can give them any gear you want. You can give them no gear. You can actually give all your guys no gear. You can take the team that we've done, replace it with 3 characters who bear no resemblance to the original characters and whatever gear you want on it, and we can't stop you. But then that's not usually the information that people are looking for.
Right. Yeah. So the other funny thing about her gear, though, is, so this is the thing that we were playing around with when we had our static Rebirth Raven team, where there's the stacked stun boost, right, with Necron Scythe and Cloak of Destiny. And in that case, we're guaranteed to stun every time with static. However, when she drops in as a bomb, she's stunning almost all the time.
That's good.
So the temptation always was, because of how we'd used it before with Batgirls to sort of boost their special one, to make it a nuke, because the special one stuns right at the beginning, doing very small portion of the special one damage. And then most of it, once they're stunned, is super boosted. However, so here's the thing. By the time Arkham Knight Batgirl comes in, I'm hoping that we've already done a bunch of damage already. There's not a lot of sort of teammates that are waiting to come in. So League of Assassins Knives is not nearly as beneficial for the splash damage, which is the biggest part. Now, it boosts special 1, but you're not guaranteed that she's going to have power when she comes in. And if that's what you can rely on, it's not great. So this is where we use overpowered super. It maxes out her crit chance on basic damage. She's got the stacked stunned boost damage, so when she comes in, opponent is stunned. Her basic combo is almost as good as doing a special 1, but it's there every time. Like, you don't need any sort of special preparation for it.
Okay.
So the only person who's potentially replaceable, and I think there might actually be an answer that's an improvement, Arkham Knight Catwoman, Tentu Toto Master's Death Card, and Quake Engine. And Quake Engine is not what we usually do as a third gear on our special specialist, because we like to have a power generation gear to make sure when you tag, you get the second bar of power immediately, right? And
yeah, especially if you're looking at any power dampeners, that's when it really makes a big difference, and you want to squeeze every last sort of inch of power out of it, because it can really muck with your strategy.
Right. But the advantage, so this affects both the start of the fight strategy, where we kill a little bit of time with Arkham Knight Batgirl in order to let Arkham Knight Catwoman generate just a tiny bit more power while she's off the screen, so that when she tags in, she's got enough for her second bar. Because if you tag her in right away, she won't. But it also boosts the amount of damage she does for most people, because against somebody without a full bar of power, it boosts special damage by 50%. It boosts damage over time by 50%, which is what she's doing a lot of. And it repeats it, right? So that once it's finished, it'll start again on whoever's in front of you.
Yeah.
And because her special 2 damage is a little bit reduced, but Quake Engine also potentially lets you steal the power that it took to do a special 2. Then a big chunk of the time, you're still doing boosted damage, even when they have power when you come in.
That makes sense.
So that's great. But so here's where I see, now that I play it with a bit more, because she has that passive where you can't rinse it. It's beautiful, because when they're off screen, you hit somebody with Astral Harness, they tag out, they're gonna bleed out past their invulnerability, and they spend their invulnerability off screen, which is great. However, it means that the person in front of you doesn't get damage over time, because it doesn't rinse, it doesn't end, so it doesn't trigger the next one from Quake Engine until that other person finishes taking all their damage.
Okay.
So I'm tempted to try it with Arkham Origins Joker as a damage over time specialist, or even maybe anybody else that might be sort of dead weight that has a full damage special 2.
Okay, so I guess that's a stay tuned then, potentially, for a part 2 to this.
Yeah, but it's super effective. Like, it's amazing how good this is, because one of the problems when you play too much of one type of fight, where you're trying to save everybody and save their health like you do in Survivor, you're not strategically using the passive Arkham Knight Batgirl. You're trying to keep them from getting knocked out. Don't bother. Just time it so that the knockout happens when you want it to, and then you can drop a bomb on whoever you're having trouble beating. Anyways, it's an interesting team, and these subtleties are really kind of fun, because it's not something that I would have been able to figure out without playing with them a bit, and we definitely didn't with the first few iterations of this specific team.
So there we go. That is 0 questions, but all injustice talk. So hopefully, for the main reason why I think people came to this channel in the first place, people are a little happy with that. And now we can get to one for you, one for us. Now we can talk about politics for a minute, I think. And this one comes from Rialos of Astora. And they say, my issue with the abortion debate is all the virtue signaling on both sides. One side says the other wants to kill babies, and the other says the first just wants to control women's bodies. Can we have a rational disagreement without calling the other person evil? There's legitimate reason for both sides to exist, and it's better to attack the arguments than to just name call. And you were the person who was replying to this, so do you want to read?
Do you want to do that like a dialogue? So we'll do back and forth, because there was a bit of, and I think it's a starting point, because, so here's the thing, right? When I'm doing comments or responding to comments, it's sort of what I'm feeling at the moment. I don't always give a lot of thought to it. And then when I've had a chance to let it sit, because this is a while ago, right? We're talking like more than a month ago. I have a few more ideas that maybe I'm more articulate with them.
Yeah,
but
for sure. So this is your chance to sort of edit your comments.
Right. So, but we'll start with what it is, because this is what everybody gets to see. Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So virtue signaling is a term that has been widely used and co-opted by bad faith actors in an attempt to discredit people for caring about others. There is no both sides here. One side has consistently stated motivations that contradict their actions, and that same side, one side, has pushed for and enacted laws that contradict their stated motivations.
And then Realos replies with, virtue signaling is a real thing, and it is damaging, be to any discussion, abortion or otherwise, that leads to strawman arguments and further division on things we could otherwise collectively agree on. That's simply a fact, and while people abuse the term to further their own cause, it by no means is solely used in that way. As far as the debate goes, I don't have a horse in the race either way, but playing devil's advocate, I would ask where your line is as to when the mother should no longer be able to get an abortion. I believe it's very difficult to draw that line, and that seems to be a legitimate discussion to be had. Maybe I'm wrong, though.
Okay, new thought that I didn't even write a note on that as I'm hearing this. Sometimes when something's been co-opted enough, you just can't take it back. Like, it's going to take...
It's true.
Right, like the swastika, right? It used to mean something completely different. And I think it's too far gone to really reclaim it.
It's true. I think the broad idea of virtue signaling in isolation is something that's useful to discuss. Because I think it is useful to discuss in sort of the more broad category of people having disingenuous beliefs, which I think is definitely a real problem.
Right.
But the problem is that you can't take a phrase out of its context.
Right.
And usually if you're aware of a phrase, you're aware of the context. So it's hard. And, you know, if I was referring to something that I think would be legitimately classified as virtue signaling, I would probably, wherever possible, try to use different language. And it's not necessarily that you can't. If you say, I know that this, you know, term is loaded, but like, here's what it feels like to me or whatever. There's ways.
But there's perfectly good language
to get
still.
yourself across. But yeah, it's very hard because there are some things that just read a certain way to some people. It's like how Electric Boogaloo now has been co-opted by that like contingent of people on the right in America who are thinking about like a second like civil war on like racial grounds, right? And the way that like the OK symbol, the emoji was like an alt-right like dog whistle for a while. There's stuff
I don't think
like
it's
that.
gone far enough, only because that's also used in basketball for a three-pointer. And in that context, in that very specific context, it seems like it's not a bad thing, right? Like it hasn't been stolen from them.
Or like the conversation that we've had multiple times about the way that the trucker convoy has made people recontextualize what a Canadian flag on a car or truck means.
Right. Oh, and so we jumped away from, sorry, that was my bad because I commented when I should have been going back to the discussion. So I said, again, this both sides thing is nonsense because it seemed like, and this is just me interjecting now, because it seems like a lot of it was based on, you know, that whole... the first statement, my issue with the abortion debate is all of the virtue signaling on both sides. So I said, again, this both sides thing is nonsense. Only one side is using the phrase virtue signaling as an insult when they can't engage with the actual point being made. If the best response to a point being made is, you don't really believe it, you're just saying it because it sounds good to other people, which is what virtue signaling is, then you're acknowledging that you're on the wrong side of the argument. When virtue signaling is used as a criticism of the position, that's a bad faith failure of logic. It is only a criticism of the person, and it is a coded and ad hominem attack that fails to engage with the issue. In the old days, you would just call that person a hypocrite. The line for when it's too late to have an abortion should be decided by medical professionals, not by politicians who believe there is such a thing as legitimate rape or that an ectopic pregnancy can be reimplanted in the uterus. Any discussion of actual limits should be among medical professionals. Not hard at all. If the problem were really just deciding when it's okay and when it's too late to have an abortion, then only a-holes are okay with states making abortions illegal for everybody.
Which I can say I didn't write it, but I broadly agree with it. I think I'm not seeing any specifics here that I really want to quibble on with you.
Okay, so the interesting thing, though, is what's happened in the news lately, right? So I think it was Mitch McConnell. It's one of those, you know, Republican politicians. Mitch McConnell, after being a really sort of vocal supporter, right? So this is the part I'm talking about when you say both sides, and what gives me like heartburn with it is that so he's been pushing states' rights, right? That the whole point of this, it's not that abortion, it's that states get to decide, which is a dumb point in itself, but it's still a point. Now he's literally come out saying that they should have a federal law against abortion, any abortion over 15 weeks. So it's made it a little bit more timely again, even though it's a month later. And that's why I thought it was worth bringing out, because to me, the key point is that last point, right? If the danger is that a small number of people will have abortions too late or basically use abortions inappropriately, then how do you justify making it illegal for everybody so that the people who should have it, because listen, abortion is healthcare. If you've ever dealt with anybody with an ectopic pregnancy or an incomplete abortion or fetal demise, abortion is healthcare. And when you ban it, or you put in barriers to actually get life-saving treatment. So here's the other analogy, right? Maybe it's too close to actually make sense to people, but if you think that sometimes having chemotherapy is too dangerous, which it is, right? It's for cancer. Then medical professionals should get together, decide who should get it, and then set up standards and guidelines. The answer isn't to have politicians ban it for everyone. So, and here's really the thing. I mean, I think I might not have stated clearly enough, right? When you say virtue signaling, that's not saying that the position is bad. It's the opposite, right? You're saying that the position is a virtue. You're signaling your virtue to other people, saying that, hey, I'm good because I believe this.
Yeah.
So what you're doing is, by using that as an insult, you're saying that the only reason you're holding a position is because it sounds good. That's a hypocrite. And when you criticize somebody for virtue signaling, you're criticizing the person, not the position. That's the ad hominem part. And you're basically acknowledging, yeah, that position is actually good.
Well, I think some people use it in a context of you are signaling virtue to a specific group of people. And, you know, when you say, like, virtue signaling, very often people are saying you not only do you not actually hold this belief, but the implication is also that there is a group, like, of leftists or liberals or whatever. There's some group somewhere that is, like, patting you on the back for it that is also ridiculous. So there's no real, I think your point still stands where you're still not really engaging with the idea other than, say, like, vaguely alluding to the fact that you maybe think it's ridiculous, but there's no real discussion of what the actual point is. And I think we see that in the thread too, because this person's issue with the abortion debate is the virtue signaling. It's not, there's no position here, right? Like, I think
the closest
saying,
you get to,
well,
though,
I think there's
the timing of it, right?
Yeah, I think there's important questions to ask. And then the question is, oh, I don't know, maybe we need to be more careful, right? So you get a lean, you get sort of the vague sense of what this person's positionality is. But there's no real outright statement of it. There's no way to have a discussion. And so if your issue with the discussion is that people are just criticizing the other people, you're just sitting with no position criticizing everybody for how they're talking about it instead of engaging with it, which is, you know,
well, it's
kind of the issue that you're talking about.
It's a rhetorical
in the
strategy,
first place,
right? It's a rhetorical strategy so that you don't have to be confronted. Like, if you maintain an ambiguous position, I think this is what Jordan Peterson does, right? If you maintain an ambiguous position and people who understand English and understand implications and connotations, they address what you're hinting at or you're dog whistling or whatever,
and then you say, I didn't say that.
Right, plausible deniability.
Yeah, I would try to do his voice, but I don't think I'm ready to do sort of my, like, bargain bin Kermit the Frog accent right now.
And I'm not even saying that Realos is doing that, because sometimes when people see different kinds of ways of arguing and they sort of feel like they align that way and the argument sounds good, they'll use it.
Yeah.
But it doesn't, if you look at it more critically, it falls apart.
Yeah. So it's hard. I mean, this conversation's been done to death. And part of the problem is that this is what it looks like, right? Where it's people addressing a million different angles, and we're pretending like both sides of the debate are monoliths. And the other thing, too, is that when we have the conversation on this level, we're compressing the discussion beyond sort of meaningful recognizability to say both sides are doing this, and, you know, everybody's saying the other person is evil, and that's it. Because, you know, you address one thing, you say, this is an argument that some people are making, and this is why this one doesn't make sense. And then somebody says, oh, but what about this argument? And I feel like we've almost even just within our discussion on this channel gone around in that circle, where somebody will address one part and then we'll talk about it, and then somebody will say, well, what about this other part? And it's not a conversation that has an end, because it's more about just pointing to the next thing on a list. It's more about moving down the point and going, well, you know, that's not as nuanced as it could be. You're leaving this thing out. And you end up talking around the issue, where I think what we really need to do is keep it focused on the actual issue at hand,
Right.
on what's actually happening. And at a certain level, we can talk about how people are hypocrites. We can talk about, how these politicians are inconsistent, and it's helpful. But even that, I mean, the reason why it's fine for us to do it, in my opinion anyways, is that we're not making the policy,
Right.
we're
Relatively powerless.
The only thing we're potentially doing is just exposing some people to this information and making people think about it. And that's sort of the most we can win.
I think that's value, though. I mean, which is why it's worth doing.
Yeah. But, when we actually are having those conversations, when it's anybody in a position of power, when it matters, we spend so much time and energy talking about what the actual intentions of the people making the decision are. And, I think what's important, and we've seen a lot of this, is like really focusing on the outcome and the impact and what it means. And so when we're having these sort of little like back and forth here, when people are talking about virtue signaling, like, who cares what the person believes? I know it matters. And I know, if you're judging a person morally, their intention matter. And I think you should take that into account and use it as a mitigating factor. But when we're talking about like legislation, like, what matters is the law put in place and what it's going to do. It doesn't, like, we don't need to have this like 300-hour discussion, like, personally about like what we believe the Supreme Court justices believe when they're making the decision, right?
Yeah.
It just, you don't change anything that way. You just and this is where I would talk about like the idea of like that sort of like virtue signaling, or looking at whether people's beliefs are legitimate or not. If you want to have this conversation, have it about the thing that's happening. And you can be mad about, what the person believes. You can be mad about all that stuff. And there's a place for that in the discussion too. But, if we need to, I think it's so hard, because all these conversations, are still valuable. I'm not trying to say anybody who's like frustrated and looking at this person in their hypocrisy shouldn't sort of look at it and be mad at it and talk about it, because you're totally within your right. But it's just hard when it feels like sometimes that it takes away from that bigger sense of what's actually happening.
Right. You don't get very far.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
So one for each of us. We're 25, a little over 25 minutes in. We're probably going to try to cut this a little short.
Yeah. So
that'll do it for this week, probably.
Right.
So to finish up, and do you have any closing sort of remarks or thoughts?
No, I don't. I think that hit the highlights. Yeah.
Okay. So I'd like to give a shout out to Eliza. Listen to Cbat. That's CBAT. Caton. She recommends you listen to the song Cbat. And this shout out was brought to you. It's a little old, but it was brought to you by a Reddit post. Have you heard about this?
I have not. I have no idea what Cbat is.
Okay, this is very funny. If you look it up, you'll find it. There was this person who posted I forget if it was like a confession. It was in some subreddit. And they were saying basically that they had this song that was their favorite song for to play with their partner when they were
I've heard that.
making, let's say.
I've heard that. Yeah.
And
I never listened to the song.
And then they edited the post later because everyone was asking what it was, and the internet collectively like went wild over it, because it's a bizarre song, and everyone was like, this is deeply confusing. And it was a sort of a big cultural moment. And so that's this week's shout out.
Right.
Anyways, we'd also like to give a huge thank you to all the lovely folks who are supporting us on Patreon.
And that would be Bombo Ben, Consul Peasant, and Edwoon supporting us at the highest tier, last word. Sinemac and Mohammed Albshaiti at the Your Message Here tier. Shawn Farrell, Daniel Simonson, Aaron Maule, Michael DeVries, Brandon C., Irvin Ruiz, Eddydoo, and Hoshi 127 at the credited level. And Chris Wolf, Scarlet Danny, Awesome Gamer 2 for 1, Pavu RS, Gavin Malott, and Isra E at the gratitude level.
Thank you so much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
Komoda.